Welcome to this presentation titled Social Engineering Fraud Schemes. My name is Joe Hillstrom, and I'll be your presenter. In this course, we're going to take a look at several recent social engineering frauds where the perpetrators got away with millions in either cash or information. You'll be shocked to see how easy it was. Before we get started, let's review some of the objectives in the course. The first learning objective is to describe email spoofing schemes such as CEO fraud. The next objective is to describe phishing and related fraud schemes. And the last objective of the course is to recognize techniques to prevent social engineering fraud schemes. Fraud is impacting numerous businesses, large and small. The annual impact is estimated to be in the billions of dollars, and that's billions with a B. While a lot of fraud schemes are sophisticated and entail technological expertise, there are some really popular schemes that are pretty simple. They're simple, but they're effective. And companies have focused on computer security like data encryption and firewalls. However, not a lot have paid attention to one of their biggest security risks, which is their employees. Fraudsters are currently and successfully employing fraud schemes that use social engineering. Some of these schemes are known by phishing or vishing, spoofing, and whaling. They require some preparation on the part of the person perpetrating the fraud and rely on trickery to persuade an employee to ignore existing controls and in some cases even common sense. CEO fraud, which is a scheme involving a false email from the CEO, is gaining popularity in the United States and has already resulted in billions of dollars of losses. Before we begin, let's talk about some of the terms that are being used. The first term is phishing, and this starts with a PH. Phishing is an attempt to obtain sensitive information from a person or company using an email. There's an offshoot of phishing called spear-phishing. Spear-phishing is defined as a phishing attack on a specific person designed to obtain information that that person has in his or her possession. There's also vishing with a V. Vishing is the use of a telephone to persuade a person to surrender personal information or even to transfer money. Now, vishing is just phishing, but with a V in front of it for voice. Spoofing gives a false impression of the email address or telephone number of the person initiating contact. For an email, it's a falsified header, so the from address appears to be from a legitimate person. For a telephone number, a bad number appears in the caller ID, so it appears to originate from a more acceptable location. Whaling is a type of spear phishing attack that targets senior executives at a company. Since the senior executives have greater access to sensitive information, systems, and banking information, this type of spear phishing attack is named because it's likened to catching a very big fish. The last thing is CEO fraud. CEO fraud is a scheme in which a spoofed or hacked email is sent to an employee from the CEO urgently requesting that money be wired to a fraudulent account, normally under the guise of a business acquisition or an advance vendor payment. We're going to be talking about cases that involve each of these types of fraud. Before that, though, let's talk a little bit more about social engineering and how information is used. Social engineering is using some form of interaction to persuade or trick someone into doing something that violates established procedure or to unwittingly divulge personal or business information. Fraudsters use social engineering and may use electronic mail, telephone, or both to accomplish their goals. The use of email is prevalent in spoofing, phishing, and whaling schemes. The use of the telephone is prevalent in vishing schemes, and the use of both email and telephone is likely to be encountered in CEO fraud. The key to social engineering is information. To be successful, the people perpetrating the fraud need to know details such as the name of the CEO, maybe the name of the chief financial officer, as well as the names of executives and managers. It might be important that they also know the names of people who can write a check or initiate and approve a wire transfer. So how do these people get this information? The easiest way to get it is information that's publicly available. Company websites are usually the starting point because they contain the names of officers, their titles, sometimes they have other contact information. Business social media like LinkedIn will also provide a lot of information if employees elect to share that information. LinkedIn generally provides a name and title associated with many people at a company, as well as their job duties. Facebook can provide some information. It just depends on how much people share on Facebook. Other times, just Googling a company and a job title can yield some very useful information. Another great source of information are open job listings. From a technical standpoint, a fraudster can tell what kind of systems the company is using just by looking at IT job postings and experience requirements. There are some other methods, and they get a little bit dirtier. Sometimes people go through a company's trash for information. Dumpster diving can also yield the names of employees and job titles. This method isn't very prevalent anymore among fraudsters, but it's still a risk. Right now, it's a lot easier to use a cleaner. It's easier and cleaner to use a computer to get the information. Other times, information can be gathered with a simple phone call. If you want to know who pays the vendors, you can just call the company operator and pose as a vendor with an unpaid invoice. They'll usually put you in contact with the person who's responsible for paying the bills. A phone call can easily get you a name, a telephone number, and an email address. There have been cases where more intrepid fraudsters comb an employee parking lot looking for an employee security badge and paperwork. They use the security badge and pose as an employee to get in, and then they start asking questions. There's also the possibility that a fraudster would try to become an employee at your company. Information is the key to their success, and they're going to use every means at their disposal to get this information. Let's look at a couple of real-life examples of social engineering in action. A medium-sized French company called Edna Industry was a fraud target, and this was reported by the BBC in January of 2016. The chief accountant of the company was called and told to wait for instructions from the president regarding a confidential transaction. The accountant then received an email from the company president stating that Edna Industry was buying a company in Cyprus. The email went on to say that the accountant would be contacted by a consultant who was working with a lawyer who would provide wire transfer details. During a 1-hour time frame, this accountant received about 10 emails and 3 or 4 telephone calls. The intent was to create a feeling that time was of the essence in consummating the transaction, and the duress caused the accountant to initiate a series of wire transfers totaling about $500,000 to bank accounts controlled by the fraudsters. Fortunately, all but $100,000 of these wire transfers were held up by Aetna's bank. Armed with nothing but the name of the company president, the name of the chief accountant, and an email address and a telephone number for the chief accountant, these people were able to steal $100,000 from a firm that only had about 50 employees. The fraud is definitely not high-tech, but it's very effective. In France, this is referred to as fraude au président, which is translated to CEO fraud in the United States. This type of fraud is popular in France, but it's not confined just to France. It's also gaining popularity in the United States as well. In April of 2015, Mattel Corporation fell victim to a CEO fraud scheme. It was during a period of weak international sales and a changeover in CEOs. During this time, a Mattel finance executive got a request from the new CEO's email account requesting a $3 million wire transfer to a new vendor in China. The wire transfer was sent, and it wasn't until later in the day when this finance executive spoke to the new CEO and happened to mention the transaction in passing that everyone realized that Mattel was a victim of fraud. The funds were never recovered. CEO fraud is extremely effective if the CEO is traveling or if the CEO is on vacation. During these times, employees may be less likely to try to contact the CEO to verify a request. If the fraudster can determine travel or vacation schedules for the CEO, there's a higher probability of success. As we talked about earlier, information is the key to social engineering. CEO fraud can use two social engineering methods: email spoofing and vishing. And vishing is just phishing via telephone using the voice. There's going to be a discussion of these two methods with further examples, as long as the discussion of vishing, whaling, and smishing, which is phishing using text messages. And text messages are called SMS messages, and that's why it's called smishing. First, though, let's talk about email spoofing.